Was that your first experience with drugs?
Yeah. I became an alcoholic at 14. My friend and I were going to nightclubs, and I would go to bed early because I was tired and drunk. And she would go to bed late or not go to bed at all because she was doing cocaine. And I told her I didn't want to because my father was addicted to cocaine and heroin. But one night, she put cocaine on her nipple, and I sniffed the cocaine. When I did that cocaine, it changed me. Once I did cocaine, it numbed my body in a way that it made me wanted to sell it. And I wanted to like use men, and I wanted to feel powerful because men were beating me up. I didn't like how I got beat up, so I was just going to have men pay me. So I was an escort at 22 years old, and I worked for an escort agency for a short time. I would go on dates for $200, and then if they didn't tip me like $300, then I wouldn't do anything for them. Everything was for sale. And I would, I was basically like a high price call girl. I was in the Washington, D.C. area, and at 22 years old, I was doing cocaine. I had my house in Reston, Virginia. I'm going on calls as an escort, and I'm making thousands of dollars, and I've got like $5,000 cash at a time. And I'm just like living this life. Like, my home looks amazing. I'm eating really good food, and I'm used to this lifestyle because of how I grew up. My mother, had always dated rich, famous men. Like, her boyfriends were like Ted Kennedy, who we know who that is. Damien
Yes.
Chapa, who's an award-winning famous actor. Eugene Fodor. Like, my mom was only with rich, famous people. I found rich, famous men I was an escort for probably like 6 months, and then I had my first sugar daddy. He's paid me $12,000 a month. And in addition to my $12,000 a month, I was also giving an American Express card, a black one. And one time I spent $44,000 on my black American Express card in 1 month. My boyfriend, my sugar daddy, said nothing. I thought for sure he was gonna balk. He said nothing. He just paid it. I would recreate. I had a very dominant personality. I would recreate in my sugar daddies the dynamic known as dominatrix. And I would find subs. Most people understand what that means. I would find men who would submit to me, who I would abuse, and who would worship me in response. So in addition to my Black American Express card, there was like rules like if I allowed him to we only had sex twice a week. If we had sex more than that, then he had to pay me in addition to the 12,000, $2,000. And I mean, there was like a whole, like everything was I looked at men like objects to be used. And I'm sure they looked at me the same way. I had my own bedroom in his house. Everything was paid for, right? So at 22 years old, I decided to buy two more houses. I bought a large 6-bedroom house in Durham, North Carolina. I also bought a condo in South Beach, Florida that was oceanfront. It was actually bayfront, waterfront, in a luxury high rise at the Floridian on the 20th floor. And this was a beautiful 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom condo. It went up from $500,000 to $1 million. Something happened with the financing, so I bought these other two places, but I couldn't buy it. My sugar daddy bought it cash. Just bought it outright for me, put it in my name. And until I was ready to sell it, and I got all the profits and everything.
Do you think that your foray into sub BDSM was some sort of
No, I didn't. It was not BDSM. That's like beating people up and stuff. Dom and sub just means that they do what I want.
do
If
you
I
think
say we're going to do cocaine together, that's what we do. If I say we're going to do the drug ecstasy together, that's what we're going to do. If I say you're going to take me to this restaurant, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to buy me this, then you're going to do it.
did you mentally abuse them?
That's what I did. I just controlled them and I didn't want to have sex with them. I forced them to like ejaculate in like 30 seconds because I didn't want them to touch me. I was disgusted. I had to numb my body.
Do you think this was some sort of therapy for you, like a self
Absolutely.
therapy?
Okay, not until later, and I can go into that more. The therapy for me was once I became sober. And I can talk about that when I get there.
You're at this place where you're living a lifestyle that is comparable to when you were younger. You're making it happen. It does seem like probably your childhood played a role into your profession in some way. I noticed that you speak very warmly of your grandfather at first. You mentioned that it devastated you when he died. So I'm assuming that you don't completely hate him for the.
Here's the thing. It was denied. My reality was completely denied. So I kind of denied my reality. And when I was 16 years old, I would reject his advances. And it would happen at certain times. He'd be like, how about a back rub? And I just started to like reject those advances and be like, no, no. And if he would try to like grab me or say, I would reject it. So at 16, I would just started to like kind of make my own boundaries. And I think that's when I started to become more like, no, assertive. So the abuse stopped when I was 16. And then it became this really weird, almost like the way I treated my sugar daddies. That's how I treated my grandfather. Like I'd be like, sit here and I would sit in his lap and like, it was weird. Then I would like take him as a date and go out with my friends. And we had like this weird, almost like Ivanka and Donald Trump, that father-daughter relationship, how it's kind of ick. That's what it turned into. And I acknowledge that now because that's not how I would treat my grandfather. I wouldn't be crawling in his lap and like that's how a woman who was molested acts. It wasn't like healthy way to be affectionate because I had to like question the touch, so I had to like kind of dominate the situation and dominate him and be like dominant over him so that he didn't cross my boundaries. And then in doing that with him, I just recreated it with these other guys. So the police officer who beat me up, it was like I had enough. After that though, I just only had these like sugar daddies. They would pay me eight to 12,000 a month, plus they would pay all my expenses. You know, this was my lifestyle. This was just how I made my money.
Were you meeting the sugar daddies through the sugar daddies you had, or did you just
Okay,
have a big network
so
of?
so I started as being an escort for a brief time, and then I met my first sugar daddy, and then after that I found out about the website seekingarrangement.com. When I found out about that website, then I started using that instead. It's more of like a dating site. I had my sugar daddies usually for like 3 to 5 years at a time. I would keep them for a long time. Some of them I still keep in touch with to this day, and we just have a friendship and are on a healing, learning, and growth path, or I don't talk to them. But I would like find one, and then, you know, I wouldn't like go and look for other sugar daddies. And also, you know, which was kind of weird, is I wouldn't get boyfriends on the side. Like, I would have my sugar daddy, but then I wasn't like sleeping with other guys or having other boyfriends. So I was usually like faithful to them, knowing I didn't have to be, but it was almost like in this weird way, like I was satisfied with my relationship with them, which is gross, but I understand why because it recreated the experience I had when I was little and it was just helping, you know, it's because I never healed my trauma. So that's what I was just recreating that because that was the program I had.
How were you socially with your friends around this time? Were you hard to deal with, or was it were you a totally different person? You were only this way with the sugar daddies.
I was rich. My partners were rich and famous and very powerful and affluent. And my friends loved riding my coattails. I was always center of the party. I loved going to gay clubs. I loved it. Had a gay best friend, Istvan, who was my roommate. We were like the best roommates ever. I had a really close group of friends who I still keep in touch with to this day, who are all on healing paths. Some of them used to party with me and now they don't party. Now they're on the same path as me. And then the other friends of mine, like, never got drunk and never were like that. So I would hang out with people who were completely sober. I started doing cocaine at 22 and I started going to rehab when I was 22. I was an alcoholic since I was 14 years old. Binge drinking and blacking out was a thing. Going to the hospital for alcoholism was a thing since I was 14 years old, including when I was babysitting one time. I got taken to the hospital blackout drunk, and the poor mom, and can you imagine, like, someone's babysitting your kids and they're blackout drunk, passed out, and have to go to the hospital for alcohol poisoning. I, from 14 years old, was like clearly sick, clearly fucked up. Because of my trauma, I was in situations where when I was 12 years old, I was assaulted by a stranger in the neighborhood. I was constantly like in situations where I would get assaulted, blackout drunk, and when I was a child, because it was allowed to happen to me in my home, and I didn't know how to advocate for myself, and I just kept getting in these situations. I guess my way of getting control of my life was when I had my sugar daddies and when I was rich, everything was under control. I was buying my own cocaine. I was with sugar daddies, so if they do what they want with me, like, they're paying me. So whatever. Also, when I found cocaine, it enabled me to not black out as much. So when I was 22, it kind of like gave me some of my like ability to like have my composure back, but it also made me be able to numb my body. So that's why I became a sugar baby at that time. When I had my children, I selected the men intentionally. When I bought my condo in Florida, I was living between Washington, D.C. and Florida, and I went to go visit Vegas, and I met my son's father. And Corey's 10 years older than me. I actually was attracted to this guy, and he was my sugar daddy. Gave me my own credit card and stuff. So I was like, I'm going to have a baby with this guy. I got pregnant with my son. So the plan was to get child support and then go to New York City. So I was pregnant with my son. I had the baby in Vegas, and then I moved to New York City. And I just saw Corey as a paycheck. Like, he's going to give me money. I didn't see him as a subjectivity to relate to, or somebody whose needs matter also. I just saw him like he's going to give me money. It didn't work out that way. So I wasn't like getting as much money as I thought. I got pregnant and I wanted to have another baby because I really wanted to be a mom, and I wanted to like love my kids up and have the same love that I got from, the nannies and stuff, try to give that love to my kids as a mom. And I had my son. I got pregnant. I had him 14 months after he was born. And his dad, he's deceased. His name is Dominic. I met him in New York City, and when I was pregnant, he was pretty cool, but when I gave birth, he started to act pretty controlling. When Chris was 1 month old, I moved to California, and I got a place. First, I got an Airbnb in Corona Del Mar, and then I immediately rented a big house. Dominic was not happy when he heard about this, so we went to court, and we actually went to court twice, but I ended up getting $13,800 a month in child support. I was pretty rich and didn't have to work, and then I would get other sugar daddies to pay me $8,000 to $12,000 a month. When I was pregnant with my kids, I wasn't able to get sober, so I was still doing alcohol and cocaine. When I was pregnant with my son, I was able to get sober, and I had like 3 months. And I told my doctor, like, I'm really proud of myself that I'm sober. Do you think that you guys could help me stay sober? And they said, thank you for telling us. And they didn't help me. They drug tested my baby when he was born. So this was a wake-up call. Like, no one's going to help you. They're just going to try to take away your kids. And this was really scary for me because when I was going to court with his dad, I went through a child services investigation. It was really scary, and I was just like, ooh, I cannot trust city enforcers. Like, they don't want to help me. They want to like punish me and separate me from my family. When I was like drinking and using, I would go into blackouts. I don't remember hitting my kids, but I've been told by my kids that I would hit them. I would do exactly what was done to me, except not the But I would like scream this close to their face and hit them and be abusive and some psychological abuse. Like, why would you make your kids believe something that's not true? Like you're going to give them away or something. I would do things like that. When my daughter was born, right before, my mom moved in with me. I got pregnant with my daughter. My boys are 14 months apart. My daughter was born when my boys were 6 and 8 years old. So they're 6 and 8 years apart from their sister. Because my mom ruined the birth of my older son, and she told me that because I had a C-section, I didn't really give birth, and was like screaming at me and making me cry. And she would always like ruin important days and make it about her and yell and scream. It was like really hard to like be around my mom. She was like really toxic and abusive because she's traumatized. It's not her fault, but like she was not allowed to be there when my second child and third child were born because I learned my lesson after the first one. So she had understood this, which was cool. So even though my mom was living with me, she wasn't there. So same thing. I had a pattern of moving when I had a baby because I didn't want to have nothing with the kid's dad. So my daughter, I got smart because I didn't like having to fight and go through child service investigation and all of that. I didn't like that. So with my daughter's dad, he and I had an agreement. He was going to be a sperm donor. So I got pregnant. It was kind of like a, agreement we had. He's going to give me $250,000. He's going to be a donor and not be responsible for any payments after that. So that was pretty cool. So he gave me all this money. And then I bought the 5th property that I owned, which was I bought a house in Los Angeles, a big house, 2524 9th Avenue. Los Angeles, California, 90018. And you can actually go, you guys, and Google it and see the pictures of how my place was. You can see all of the toys in my kids' playroom. You can see my bedroom. You can see everything. It's kind of cool to see how I used to live. Like my yard was beautiful. It had giant water, like dramatic water fountains and rock features in the front yard and the backyard and gazebos and day beds and a 15 by 15 foot square trampoline, which is bigger than the round ones. It was like a play world for the kids. I had a 4-story huge house. Like I was like, it's like a $1.5 million house. It's like living the dream. I just had my daughter. I moved from Los Angeles. I still had my house in LA, but I moved from, oh no, I moved from Los Angeles to Austin, Texas. And I gave birth to my daughter in Austin, Texas. Then I moved into my new house that I bought in Los Angeles because at that point we had this agreement. He's not going to try to be in the way. So I was like, okay, I'll go back to LA. So I was only in Austin to have the baby. I was there like 6 months for the end of my pregnancy. Around this time, my sister and I became estranged. So my sister came to the birth of my daughter and it was really great. And my brother was there and it was really great. My family life just started to get kind of rocky. When I moved into my new house in LA, it was so wonderful having my daughter and my 2 boys, but I was still really struggling with addiction. My mom moved back in with me in Los Angeles in my new house. Having my mom was actually really cool because like I had this period where she and I were fighting and I had this new house and we're doing all this renovation and spending all my, like I'm getting $14,000 a month and then I get another $8,000 a month from this sugar daddy and I'm pretty rich. My mom's just riding my coattails and she gets $1,000 a month allowance and her own credit card to spend and go buy groceries. And she and I are doing well and have a new baby. Every morning, my mom watches the baby for me. My daughter loves my mom and I get to sleep in every single morning because my mom is there. It was amazing. I had this nanny, Blanca, for my boys who worked for me. Blanca worked for me up until my kids were taken away, but my mom filled in the gaps when Blanca wasn't there. So I had a live-in housekeeper / nanny. She did everything because I grew up with a live-in housekeeper nanny. So my kids, and I had au pairs. So since my kids were born, they always had a nanny. And Blanca worked for me 6 days a week for like 12 hours a day, and she would clean and cook and be with the boys. Having my mom move in was like, cool, now I can have Blanca part-time, and I'm going to give my mom this $1,000 a month. So it was like working out, because now I don't have to like spend as much money on the housekeepers. I'd rather give that money to my mom. Not housekeeper. Blanca was still there cleaning, and she was still there a lot helping out. Blanca continued to work with me until the last day I had my kids, by the way. She was she was part of the family. So as the whole time I was in California, I met Blanca when I first got here to Redondo Beach. So Blanca worked with me. Every time I moved, Blanca moved with me. My mom and I started to have some problems. And by this time, my sister and I were estranged and not talking. My brother was fighting with my mom and sister a lot and wasn't talking to them, but was still talking to me. There was just a lot of rockiness in our family, and I had been having Child Protective Services come for a variety of reasons. My mother had moved to Florida to be with my brother, and I was living alone with my kids. And I was living the same lifestyle, except now I'm back to like having people taking care of my kids instead of my mom. And I was getting so blackout drunk that my alcoholism had gotten to a point where I kind of preferred for no one to really know that I was that drunk. I had just bought this brand new RV, and I was coming back from like a trip with my kids, and the kids were in the RV instead of at my house. So usually I would just leave my kids home alone and they have room to like run around and play. But this one particular time I left my kids alone, I left them in the RV. I told you I had like $1.5 million house. I had $110,000 brand new RV, really beautiful one where the whole side came out. And I had parked the RV like right in front of the restaurant where I had a date. This person I had a date with, I met on Seeking Arrangement. And in the arrest report, like he lives right next door to the restaurant. So my kids are right outside. So in the arrest report, it says like this guy gave me, and this is what happened. Basically, I'm in West Hollywood, and the West Hollywood sheriff's officers show up because I'm really drunk. I just went on a date. This guy gave me $2,000. I didn't have to hook up with him, didn't have to do anything. We just went out to dinner. It was amazing. I've got $2,000, but I want some cocaine. And he and I like get in some kind of an argument. For some stupid reason, I think I'm gonna I just like call the cops on him. And I'm blackout drunk. And the cops come and they arrest me for prostitution. And as I said, I never even hooked up with this guy. It was just like part of the story. He was like, yeah, I gave her $2,000 for a date. They just assumed, but as a sugar baby, like the guy gets skin in the game for going on a date with you. Like you don't hook up with him. So it wasn't even prostitution. But what happened was like, I wanted to create this narrative that this guy raped me, and then I was gonna like sue him and get money and lie. So I called the police and said that he assaulted me when he didn't, and I lied, and it's in the police report. So that's not true. He didn't like assault me. He did give me $2,000 though, and he was a gentleman. Like he never tried to do anything. He was just being cool. We got in an argument because like it wasn't enough for me to be drunk. I needed to have cocaine. And I called the cops on him because I was going to create this story, and it was evil what I was going to do to him. And I can see how the universe would turn that around on me, and it would be like an opportunity to either awaken me or take me out. And that's exactly what happened, because I was going to lie about this guy, and I had done it before. I had made up lies to the police before and sicked them on people. I had like a narcissistic personality where I would hit my kids, I would hit old people, I would hit my mom, I would hit dogs, I would lie. One time I got mad at this guy and I lied and said he was going to kill his wife, sent the police there. You would do these evil things. I didn't consider others' needs or how it would impact them, or the fact that doing this actually hurt me also. I was just hurting, so I wanted to hurt others. I was going to take this guy's money because he was really, really rich. And I was going to like sue him, and I was going to create this story about how he tried to rape me. So the cops came and it backfired. I went so far as to the cops came, they took me to the hospital. I was like pretending like I got raped, and it was taking forever for them to do this test on me. And I was so blackout drunk, I don't even remember if I had a test done. But it was weird because the police were with me and they didn't leave me the whole time. And he didn't even have sex with me or anything. I just pretended that he like grabbed me or touched me or something. I don't know why I was like trying to lie like that. It was the weirdest thing. But I was like, look, he hit me or grabbed me and he totally didn't. It was just like I just know that he didn't do anything. And I called the police on him because I was mad because I wasn't getting my way about cocaine. So I was going to do this lie. And the way it backfired is when I was leaving the hospital with the police, they told me that I couldn't leave and I needed to stay with them. And we were standing in front of the hospital on the sidewalk and I was bored and I didn't want to stay there with them. I told them that they need to take me out of here right now. So they said, fine, put your hands behind your back. And they arrested me for prostitution and put me in the back of the car. As I said, I never even hooked up with this guy. I just had an evil plan. But I think that they knew I had an evil plan. I think like they knew I was going to lie or something. And they arrested me for it, charged me with a crime I didn't do. I was in jail and I was freaking out. I was losing my shit. And I kept begging to leave the cell. All night long, I was freaking out. And I was begging to leave the cell because I needed to use the phone because I needed to call my son. He was only 10 years old. He was alone babysitting an 8 and 10-year-old. And my daughter had a diaper that I didn't want him to have to change. I knew he knew how to change pee-pee diapers, but I never made him change poop diapers. And she's going to wake up and poop. And also she was sleeping on this top air. It was just like not a good situation and I needed to get back to my kids, so I was freaking out and I left them alone because I was too scared to leave them alone with people. And as I told you, when they drug tested my son when I was pregnant, I learned like you need to keep secrets. You can't ask for help. And I tried so many times to get sober. I couldn't get sober. I was using against my will. I really wanted to get sober. While I was in that jail cell, I was calling my son over and over again, losing my shit. And there's a police officer listening to every one of my phone calls. And he's sitting there and he says, who's watching your kids? He starts to berate me. And I go from saying my babysitter, this person, this person, this person. Finally, I say my kids are alone. I lie about the age of my son. Instead of saying he's 10 years old, I say he's 12. The police officer asks to talk to my son. He gets his location. And they get there before my sister does. I'm in the jail cell absolutely losing my shit. Next thing I know, my children are in the police station. My sister is in the police station. Then I get called to the front and a DCFS worker is there. And she tells me that she is going to take my children into DCFS custody and it will take 6 months to a year to get my kids back and I have to sign this thing. And I'm absolutely in shock. And I sign this piece of paper in front of me. And my children get taken away to an orphanage. And they refuse to release my children to my sister, who is there at the station ready to take my children. And instead of giving them to my children, they mistake her for a African American woman who got charged with prostitution. And they think that because she's this African American who got charged with prostitution, she can't have my kids. But my sister is white. And if they had just looked at the race, they would see that this is a completely different who may have the same birthday as my sister, but the race is wrong. Like, this is not her. Mistakenly identifying my sister as someone with some kind of criminal record, they refused to give my children to her and put them in the foster care system. My children's first placement was in an orphanage. My daughter was then moved from the orphanage 2 hours away to Riverside, California. My boys and my daughter cried as they said goodbye because they wouldn't see each other again for 6 months. I was in jail for 5 days. I was facing 3 counts of child endangerment. One was a strike felony and the other 2 were regular felonies. I was facing 13 years and 2 months in prison, and I was also facing the misdemeanor of prostitution. When I saw the first judge with my public defender, I was still in custody. I was still in jail. I immediately lost my brother, my mom, my sister, every one of my friends. Not one person would support me. My brother became estranged from me. My sister became estranged from me. My mother became estranged from me. Every one of my friends. I had the party house where everyone brought their kids to go hang out. Like all of the moms were friends with me. Everyone rode my coattails. I went all around Europe to 44 countries with my two boys, and I always had at least 2 or 3 of my friends and their children with me, all of whom I paid for, everything. And I went from having all of these friends who were riding my coattails, all of my family members who were riding my coattails. My child support ended, the $14,000 a month. Also, I was forced with, like, now I have to get sober, right? I can't do drugs and alcohol anymore. So I can't be a sugar baby anymore. So my $8,000 a month from my sugar daddy, done. These $2,000 dates, like, nope, no more high priced call girl, no. It was like, the jig is up. And I had to make a choice, like, do I get sober? Do I find my higher self, or do I continue this path of destruction and lies and re-traumatizing myself and having unhealthy, codependent, toxic relationships? Or do I choose the higher path? And what is that higher path? I didn't see my children for a month. My boys were in the orphanage for probably about a few weeks until they were placed in Simi Valley. My daughter immediately got sent to a group home with a whole bunch of babies and toddlers in a Riverside Spanish-speaking only household where nobody spoke English. The first time I saw my kids, it was over a month. I saw my 2 boys separate from my daughter. My daughter had a bleeding diaper rash, and she was covered in acne. I've never seen her with acne or diaper rash or any of that, but she was so stressed out and scared and was crying nonstop. The foster mother told me, even though she didn't speak any English, I spoke some Spanish. And my mom told me my daughter just cried nonstop. She was really stressed out. Our first visit was devastating. You know, it was like we were only allowed to hang out together in McDonald's for an hour. And then she was ripped away from my arms, screaming and crying. And then I didn't get to see her again for a whole week. And then I got to see her for another hour. And then she cried and screamed, and this went on. I would see my boys about the same amount of time, except I was allowed to see them for like 3 hours. And these visits were usually done in a office at a Department of Children and Family Services office. Sometimes I went months without seeing my kids. The visits were really traumatizing because they were never in a home environment where we could snuggle. It was always someone writing a pen and interjecting and telling me not to talk about that, not to talk about that, not to talk about that. Change the subject. Don't do that. Don't do that. And we weren't allowed to really like snuggle or like, you know, be ourselves. This was in June. It was July 2018 when I lost my kids, on the 21st of July 2018. I got sober August 2nd, 2018. My boys got sent to another foster home. They were separated from each other, and it was like a temporary home that they would go to. So there were times when all 3 of my kids were separated at the same time. A year and a half after, or actually less than that, like a year and a couple months after my kids were taken away, COVID started. My boys were in their 3rd placement with my mother. My daughter was in her 3rd placement with another foster family close to where my mother moved. My mom moved to Huntington Beach, and my daughter's foster family was in Costa Mesa. And in March of 2020, when COVID started, I was no longer allowed to see my kids. After a year and a couple months, I was of having these like terrible monitored visits. Then I had to move to these even more traumatizing phone visits. And I was only allowed to talk to my kids on FaceTime with a monitor for 45 minutes, and that was it. These phone conversations were devastating. I would cry. It was just horrible getting alienated from my kids. It's been hell on earth since the first day. And throughout all of it, I was all alone, so I decided that I would do drug and alcohol treatment centers. So for a year and a half, I went to drug and alcohol intensive outpatient treatment centers 5 days a week. And then I did a partial hospitalization program 5 days a week for 6 hours a day to heal my trauma. I had 4 mental health evaluations. I continued to see a therapist and a psychologist and a psychiatrist. I went to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, Codependence Anonymous, Al Anon, and Sex Addicts Anonymous meetings. I went to so much personal development that I started to get creative, and I would go to Course of Miracles, and then I started to go to nonviolent communication groups, and I was always working on myself. I had target behaviors that I was always working on, and I just kept doing better and better and giving letters to the court systems, showing them the work I was doing, and going to drug tests 4 times a week.